It is Thursday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Central Europe, and it's time for another episode of our Space Café BeNeLux by Dr. Heike Poignand today. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback as we will learn and improve based on that. I'm Torsten, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space, new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. In case you want to join as in our supported team, please be aware it's just a click away for you on our website. And I know many of you are familiar with our website, the bi-weekly and the daily newsletters and the Space Café podcast. And this morning we released a new podcast with Dr. Alice Gorman, Space Archaeology and an attempt to rethink humanity, with a multi-award winning author and researcher. Absolutely fantastic to listen to Alice every time. We also have new episodes in our Space Café radios. As you know, the short form podcast with Stuart Bain of North Star, Earth and Space, live from the World Satellite Business Week, and with Haji Napier, the Director General of the Malaysia Space Agency and Lima 23. You can find all our audio series wherever you get your podcast from or on our website. And if you want to become a space watcher and let the world know about it with your cool t-shirt, with your mug, so visit our fan shop. It's just a click away also on our website. And if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and of course on YouTube. And with that, my job is almost done and I'm handing over to Heike today in Hamburg, as you told us before. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Torsten, for having us today and for the kind introduction. So today I'm talking to Major Nicolas Gérôme, head of the Space Office at the Belgian Ministry of Defence, about the question, space for defence or defence for space? Welcome. So we agreed that I can call you simply Nicolas, no title, no ranks, no uniform, because we want to keep it rather informal, have more of a personal chat, and you state your personal opinion. That being said, let's start by introducing you and your impressive curriculum. You're a telecom engineer from the Royal Military Academy in Brussels, and you hold additional degrees in geomatics, big data, and space mission design. You started your career for the Belgian Air Force and were then assigned to the Joint Staff as project and program manager in geospatial, space, telecom, tactical data links, networking and remote sensing domains, and including involvement in the multinational Helios constellation for Belgium defense. So before I continue your bio, I'd like to ask the first question here regarding the multinational Helios constellation. Can you tell us a bit more about what it is, what you did, and why it's important for Belgium?
So first of all, good afternoon or good morning or good night, wherever you are, everybody. I'm really delighted to participate to this Space Cafe. Like mentioned, this is informal talking, so I'm not speaking on behalf of Belgian Defence. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, or only me. So in order to answer your question, why is the Helios constellation important? Because Helios constellation was born in the 90s, and at that moment we were after the 94 events in Rwanda, and in Belgium these events had, of course, very important consequences. There were at that moment a parliamentary commission, and one of the recommendations of that parliamentary commission was for Belgium to acquire a sovereign imagery observation from a space-based imagery system. So at that moment, for a small country like Belgium, it was still complicated to operate that kind of system alone. So we discussed with partner and we joined the program with France, the French, mainly French program, but also with Italy, Spain, Germany, Greece. And why is it unique in its nature, Helios, at that moment? No, now Helios is history, but it was the first multinational military co-owned program. And as far as I know, it still is the only one. So there are several models of partnerships and multinational operation of space constellation, but this was the only one which was co-owned by several nations and co-operated by the same nations. And well, now it's history, but it was the base of the multinational cooperation in terms of space defense for Europe, let's say.
Okay, and it was led by Belgium or initiated, or
no, it was led by France. It was led by France, and it was cooperated and co-owned by the other countries. It has some drawbacks, of course. It had some drawbacks for the confliction of the programming of the satellite, for example. But it helps us to work together. And it's quite rare in the military sector to have a co-own capabilities, and it's even more rare in intelligence sector. And so this was the uniqueness in the Helios program.
Oh, thank you. We're already in the middle of the topic, but there's still some more steps in your CV I'd like to mention. So then before returning to the Belgian defense as SATCOM network architect, you also have some experience in the private sector as a business developer for geospatial intelligence software components. I'm curious about that part regarding that excursion in the private sector. What do you do exactly? If you can tell us a bit more, for which kind of projects?
Yeah, so it was. Yeah, sorry. Please.
No, answer. Go ahead. Then I.
Yeah, so as many people, I'm curious. So I was also curious of what was on the other side, and so it's important to have different perspective on the same problems. And so I stayed in the same environment, let's say, but with of course another perspective, and it was really enriching. And in order to work also in the private sector in a small company instead of a big organization like a defense, so it was very enriching in terms of management and technical aspects. Very interesting, yes. And as many people told me that I was stupid to leave the public sector for the private, then people I was stupid to leave the private sector to come back in the public sector. So more or less, I did nothing wrong.
So what was different, or did it change your general view and understanding of defense and interaction with the commercial world? Does it help today?
Yes, it helps me today, of course, to improve my relationship with private companies, and that I think many engineers or people working in project management in public sector could benefit from a small transition to the private sector. Yes, for sure.
Okay, you just said you returned to the Belgian defense. And since 2018, you're head of the Belgian Space Office at the Strategy Department and led the development of military space-based capabilities for the Belgian defense. And recently, you've been appointed to command the Belgian Defense Geospatial Center. So maybe congratulations might still be appropriate here. But let's come finally to today's question: space for defense or defense for space? The relevance of space for defense might seem obvious, but we will also see then in the light of increasing threats if space and space asset needs defense to be protected. And as we would like to reach out to a bit of a broader audience than the insiders that are at the relevant conferences, I would start with a broader question to bridge that. maybe what do you think is the biggest misconception regarding the combination of defense and space in the population, or the general public?
Yes, I think when I talk to people that have very few knowledge about space sector or defense sector in general, and when you speak that you work for a defense in space or space for defense, well, they think that you're putting weapons in space, of course, and they mix up space for defense and militarization of space or weaponization of space, which are obviously two very different things. So the military are using space for many different purposes, of course, and rely on space to perform their activities on the ground. We do not fight in space for fighting in space. We use space services to bring data, products, effects from space to the people on the ground. And the purpose of the space services are to have an effect on troops on the grounds to support military operations or intelligence activities. And on the other side, of course, these services needs to be protected, and the new threats that are rising today needs also new protection and new resilience, and that's the defense for space that we also need, of course. And this is nothing compared to putting weapons in space, of course, and having aggressive behavior in space, which is not at all the ambition of a small country like Belgium. But we see that it is the case for some countries, and we need to be prepared to be resilient towards those new threats and new activities, or at least to be aware of what is happening in order to react appropriately.
Yeah, I think that is also about all kinds of movies, and there is to really have the difference what is reality and what is what is the use of space for defense. So maybe could you tell us a bit more about the applications? I mean,
Sure.
there is of course the SATCOM. There is Earth observation, reconnaissance, space situational awareness.
So indeed, for military, there are typically 6 domains that we can consider where space is providing services to military. The first one we think about is obviously navigation and timing, so GPS. Militaries are addicted to GPS. There is GPS in every devices, and it's since the 80s we have grown a very big addiction to GPS, and now we realize that it should not be taken as granted, and we have to defend it or to find alternative on the ground or in space in order to navigate correctly. And this starts from the very beginning, from being able to read a paper map or with a compass for the simple soldier, or to have a very complex weapon system that is resilient with additional positioning or timing sources. So that's the most obvious and commonly distributed use of space for military forces. The second one is, of course, SATCOM, especially in expeditionary format, which was for the last 20 years the most of the operation for Western countries. You deploy troops, you deploy compounds, you have air assets, you have navy ships, and all of these, everything which floats, which flies, which drives, is equipped with a SATCOM, at least for voice, and for most of them now also data. So you need SATCOM for data streaming, for real-time command and control, and for many different types of usage. The third usage is observation, of course, with visible infrared, radar, for intelligence purpose, for reconnaissance purpose, for surveillance, so what we call ISR. This is also very used. In the beginning, it was this application that drives the two big nations in the 60s to develop space capability, because both countries are nuclear warheads, and the purpose of developing those observation satellites, the initial purpose was to observe the other one in order to see when these warheads would be possibly deployed or moved. And nowadays it's becoming a big part and a big enabler of any military operations. And also a lot of commercial companies are jumping into this business as well. Another usage is, of course, weather, being just meteorologic and normal weather forecast, which use a lot of space assets and space weather as such to protect the space asset themselves. A fifth usage is ballistic missile defense, or in general, missile defense. Why? Because when you detect launch, space is obviously a very important place to detect them as soon as possible. And so that's where you would put the appropriate sensors to detect any missile launch. And the sixth domain that we usually consider among the militaries is the space situation awareness, or space domain awareness, as we call, which means basically before operating anything in space, you should know what's in there and who is there to do what and where and when and with who and against who. So this is just a situation awareness, which you need in any kind of domain that you will operate. So in order to operate in space, you first need to know this. So that's obviously the mandatory and the prerequisite condition to operate in the 5 other domains, of course.
Mm. Yes, and the sixth or the last one you're mentioning, there's an expression I like very much. They talk about planetary defense, but this is, I guess, more not about alien battleships, but it's about asteroid impact, space debris. Is this part of the space situational awareness, or is it something different?
Well, there is no common agreed definition of space situation awareness among the different organizations, and NATO definition of what is space situation awareness is something. ESA has his definition of space situation awareness, and the EU, for example, have also their definitions. So among these different organizations, for example, for ESA, NEO is part of space situation awareness. But for us, military, planetary defense is not our main concern, of course. It still remains a scientific endeavor, of course. But the day that those means will exist to, for example, deflect or deviate an asteroid, basically that could also become a weapon and become a very big geopolitical issue if you want to deviate this asteroid from Moscow to New York or opposite.
Yeah. But also the near Earth objects, or they are also a threat to your assets in the end. So if they're even just there.
So of course, in terms of generic space situation awareness considerations, we should consider them as well, of course. But to find mitigation, let's say, is not for the moment the main task for this.
Of course. Okay, we have shed some light on the application in general, what's existing, and we've got a very broad overview. Thank you. So let's pick an important program, maybe to dive a bit deeper from the domain of SATCOM. There's this big upcoming program, IRIS², for European secure communication infrastructure. What is it? Is it relevance? What does it include?
So obviously it is relevant, and it is important for Europe as a strategic assets to improve autonomy in terms of SATCOM. And so what is it first? So it's a global frame. It's a complete framework for satellite communication for Europe, not only for member nation, but also for EU institutions and for EU agencies, and for companies and private use, also for governmental and for militaries as well. So there will be several components on the ground in space, of course, at different orbits. And there will be a lot of new technology. So it will be like a very big enabler for new technologies, and will bring, I think, a lot of autonomy for Europe, and expand the use of space-based capabilities and space-based connectivity also, of course.
So it seems to be the project, because it's really combining all there are really, it's hard governmental, military communication. There is some dual use and commercial. including like innovative safety features from, I don't know, SATCOM, optical, quantum key distribution, whatever. So this is all in one.
Yeah. So a lot of, I mean, that's why it's important also, not only for the operational aspect, but also for the industrial aspect that is behind, for the fact of being sovereign and autonomy. It's very important. The alternative would have been, okay, let's not do this and just all buy Starlink equipment. And then we have seen, for example, in Ukraine, what happened with Starlink. They provide a lot of Starlink terminals in the beginning of the war. It was a very big advertisement for this company. And then suddenly they switch off the service because, well, basically because of a battle tweet between Zelensky and Elon Musk. So we see it's very fragile, and it's not the good system for gov-to-gov, for example. So we need to be autonomous in Europe on these aspects. And quantum key is also part of the autonomy in order for having the crypto and the needed resiliency and security. So I think, and I see in the chat list some people that are much more entitled than me to speak about this installation, because I'm not entitled to explain all the benefit of this, but I can just appreciate that its project is tackled with sufficient priority and sufficient budget at European level. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I just think it's also good in terms of cooperation, good to see that programs like this are happening for the European autonomy. So from the European level coming to the national level, what does that mean for a country like Belgium? I mean, why does Belgium need to build resilience in space? And
so that's yeah.
So, no, just.
Oh, sorry. Please finish your question. I just interrupted you.
No, it's basically two in one. So the first question: why does Belgium need to build resilience in space?
Yes. So Belgium is how to say? It's a fertile ground for space. First of all, at institutional level, at industrial level, at academic level, we have different center of excellence or competitivity pole for space weather or cyber for space, for example. For defense, we need to embrace the space defense and to encompass space in our operational domains, of course. And as a state, also, we need to protect our assets, because even for commercial assets, at the end, in fine, is the state which is the final responsible for assets that are launched under its name. So for this, we need to protect our interests everywhere in the world, and including also in space. So all civilian and governmental and military assets needs also to be protected, or to be at least to be defended. And on top of this, we also all lives and all depends on space. Not only the military, but also anyone, any citizen. A lot of companies, also institutions, depends a lot on space for different reasons, and some of them are really depending on space for their crucial business. Basically our daily life is fueled by space. That's the wording that the US Space Force is using, but this is also true in Europe. If you listen to the Americans, of course, they would say that if GPS falls out, then the whole society will collapse in one day. I don't believe this. It's much more complicated and nuanced than that. But still, we depend a lot on space, and we do not, for example, make big national exercise to know how to react in case of denial of space-based services, for example. That's also part of the resiliency that we need to build up front. So yes, for all these reasons, I think we need to defend space, and also because the threat level is rising. Many of those space services were just considered under the scope of safety, not under the scope of security, meaning only natural hazards. But now we need to deal about threats And space has already been dangerous because of vacuum, because of temperature, because of radiation, etc. But now it's also dangerous because, unfortunately, because of man-made activities and intentional threats. So that's for me the new thing.
And what do you do to get there? So is it like build redundancy, or as you say, start with an analysis?
So there are several
from the Belgian side. From the Belgian side, I mean, for you.
So from the Belgian side, but I think any nation is, at least in Europe, is having the same approach. And now we also have a common approach, which is written in the new European Space Strategy for Security and Defence, which has been recently published, and which proved that all the European nations have the same view on this. And there is several ways of action. First of all, there is knowing what's in space, so improve the space situation awareness capabilities, because space situation awareness is like a big Swiss cheese, but there is a lot of holes and not enough cheese. So we need to build cheese and filling the holes and the gaps, the capability gaps in terms of space situation awareness, in order to know everything, because we start to see also evasive maneuvers, and of course our adversaries know where are those holes, and they will do maneuvers in these holes, and so on and so on. So first of all, knowing what's in space, improving SSA. Then we need to make our space system more resilient in case of attacks. And of course, when we speak about attacks, I don't speak about the anti-satellite missile that explode and makes dozens of debris, but there are multiple vectors of attack that are possible that we need to be confronted and to be prepared for. And another way, and which is a bit more paradoxal, is to be resilient from our space data, product, and services, and build ground alternative for these. So, for example, the GPS, the US approach for GPS was to always defend GPS above everything. And now they consider that you cannot defend against any threat, the GPS, and you have to have alternative. And now they are starting the discussion to rebirth the old LORAN-C capability, which is an old air navigation system that could be a ground alternative to GPS, or to have, for example, quantum PNT device that could help us being more resilient and not depending on space. So being less dependent from space system is also part of the resiliency, because if, for example, we have a Kessler syndrome, which, let's take the worst scenario, which would just screw up the low Earth orbit, then we lose a lot of services, and we'll have to build resiliency on this based on many ground-based alternatives. So this is also a vector of mitigation for these threats. And then the fourth vector is probably deterrence, and have other action also, not always in the space domains, but that would deter adversary to perform any hostile act in space. But that's much more complicated.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I think the also defining what is resilience, and that we also have space to complement Earth services, but not to forget that there need to be redundancies if one or the other fails, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting. So we have a question coming in. So for the time being, I leave them for a later stage. Just I've noticed them, so don't panic. We talked to them. My next question, in the past, it seemed a bit that military had some really unique access through the latest developments, and equipment was always ahead. And now it seems a bit, for my that also from security conferences were from a few years ago, that military or defense is kind of falling a bit behind regarding development and procurement in certain high domains, also very high tech. Do you agree? And if yes, why is that so?
So yes and no. So indeed, a few decades ago, it was Well, basically, we are in space because the first history of space launch is from a military context and from a Cold War context that brings us to this situation. But nowadays, of course, the power of civilian R&D brings a lot of new technology on the market. And if the technology is on the market and is commercial off the shelf, of course, it's always cheaper than to develop your own technology. But still, you still need to invest and develop in certain technology for military purpose or for dual purpose that would not be developed by the civilian world because they would not be, for example, profitable. Like, for example, for the Galileo, the public regulated service was thought as a governmental service with a possible usage for military. And now we have we arrive at a stage where we will have this service that will be broadcasted and the signal in space will be fully operational, while the receiver on the market have not been developed because there was not enough incentive for the industrial to take the risk in putting venture capital to develop those. So you still need to develop technology which is primarily used by military and then can also be dually used by civilians. But of course, for most of application, the civilian technology already exists, but it does not prevent that you still need to invest in military technology.
Yeah, and dedicate. So if I get this right regarding a solution, so there are both, industry is also speeding up, getting faster. There's a lot of information out there. Do you also think there's some kind of structural administrative issues inhibited to be fast to catch up, or could you outsource those development to industry? How does that work?
Yeah, of course, the way of how public procurement works in Europe is as it is, and it's slow, and we cannot change everything, but it has its drawbacks in terms of rapidity and in terms of flexibility to acquire things and to test new things. But I think there are many mitigations that are now taken and new development programs and frameworks that allows new technology for military space to be developed. But on the other side, the new space is developing very fast, and new space brings new threats. That's a fact, but also brings a lot of new opportunities also for governments and militaries. So there is no reason that we would not benefit from them also, of course. And if we can have cheaper systems that we can more easily procure, well, we benefit from it as well, of course. And it also allows, with the new space effect and the fact that space is now cheaper and cheaper, that a lot smaller nations are now the possibility to acquire sovereign capabilities, which was not the case a few years ago. And now you have smaller and smaller countries that have their own capabilities for military or governmental purpose, for example.
So there's also a bit like the synergies growing more and more together, that you have also commercial usable intelligence, or not only hardware components, but also the intelligence as such, the data that can be used, and vice versa. Like also in Iris Square, where all this is growing a bit more together than having like always this totally classified military and then.
Yes, it's now becoming. It's not that you have the easily identified red, blue satellites. No, everything is gray. A lot of different business model exist in terms of having a national platform with different payloads operated by different countries and providing data to yet another country, which might not be in a certain alliance or which might have in a downwards activity another ancillary product or secondary product, which is also exploited by another company. So it's always complicated to know who is doing what for who with which data, and there are a lot of different business models that are built up. So the traditional, let's say, sovereign military satellites still exist, of course, for a certain purpose. But for example, for intelligence activities, you see a lot more private companies providing tons of data. And I think that the Ukraine war has been illustrated a lot with data from private company. But it does not prevent intelligence service to acquire their own sovereign capabilities, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So both can coexist, of course, and needs to coexist to be complementary. Same thing in SATCOM.
Mm-hmm.
You still have sovereign SATCOM, you will still have,
yeah.
And it will be complemented by IRI² capabilities or commercial capabilities from different sources, because the portfolio should fit many different types of use case in SATCOM.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yes. We've talked quite a bit about this part where space is used for defense, but also maybe a bit more. We had some examples, but also again to the part where space needs to be defended.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can tell us a bit more about this. What's really new there? What has the scenario changed? How is it related to space? What are the threats?
Yeah. So indeed, when people are not from the domain, they think about, of course, the big missile hitting a satellite and generating dozens of debris. That's, of course, let's say the ultimate end of the violence spectrum in space. But before reaching that level, there are many vectors of attack that are much more likely to be used before something like this happens. So, because military are addicted to space, it is known also by our adversary, and they consider this as a vulnerable technology component that provides us an information superiority, especially for Western country that relies a lot on intelligence and real-time command and control. So therefore, with cheaper access to space, it is an incentive, and it is very attractive for countries to develop counter space capabilities, which might sometimes be cheaper to develop than the space capability themselves, in order to attack or to deny, to destroy, or to disrupt space capability from the military or from the government or from the commercial companies, because we have spoken about commercial activity providing intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It means that if we know who they are selling their intelligence to, they also become a target for the people that are targeted by these intelligence services, of course. And all of this occurs basically in a vacuum of international law, so it's very attractive to develop counter space technology, and the surveillance is complex also on top of this. So what type of threats? Of course, the most encountered threats are the threats that are related to electronic warfare. So jamming the signal from space is easy, because usually the satellite is far, so the signal is weak, so it's easier to jam, especially if it's a GNSS signal, so navigation, because it's a narrow spectrum, so easy to jam. If you put a bit more high-hand beats, you can also jam the uplink to this satellite, or to spoof the signals for the different users. So these are very common threats in nowadays, more and more systematically observed in all operation theater, and especially now in Ukraine or Syria or Sahel and so on. Beside this category of electronic warfare threats, you have also cyber threats, because everywhere where there is a satellite, there is a computer behind, so there is a network, and so these can be attacked by cyber. And especially cheap satellites for university, for example, that are not putting a focus on security, they are quite easy target for hackers. You can hack for corrupting the data, for stealing the data, or even to introduce commands on the payload and even on the platforms. All of this already occurred. Of course, it's not public, because the victim of those attacks are, like for any cyber attacks, not prone to speak about it, but it happens. And the problem is that, as a cyber attack is not attributable, or is very complicatedly attributable, it's quite very attractive for the adversary to perform these attacks. Then you have all the types of threats which are based on co-orbital maneuvers. So when you are close to the other satellite with another space object, and then many different course of action are possible. And we have seen a lot of different way of attacks. You can easily jam or spy, of course, the other space objects. Then you can try to force him to maneuver in order to diminish his lifetime, or to move it from his primary mission. Or what we also have observed is, for example, a disruption of the links, or to, for example, spray something on the solar panels, which will mean that the electrically will be choked at the end, or to disrupt with small metal things, or to whatever you can imagine. If you are very close to the object, you could just bounce it brutally into it and just purposely generate debris and destroy the satellite. That has not been observed yet, fortunately. So yes, we see a lot of these maneuvers more and more, and it's becoming more public also, because it's visible by a lot of commercial companies are providing SSA data, so anyone can see it. And you see that, well, the three big nations in space are using a lot of these maneuvers in space to push the others to do some stuff.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
then besides this, you also have other threats, like threats based on directed energy weapons. So basically microwave or laser with enough power. It's much more efficient in space because there is no atmosphere. Then the problem is more the generation of the power, which is easy on the ground, but which is more complicated in space, of course. And you see a lot of development in technology from the big players in this domain. It's not really mature operationally yet, or not mentioned as such by the one that would have already, of course. But I would guess that in a few years, this will become more or less more and more standard weapons, and that the laser war in space will not be fiction anymore, unfortunately. And then beside this, you have, of course, the direct ascent missile, which has been tested by several nations, including US, Russia, China, of course, and the last one was India. You can attack the ground segment. For example, if you have a constellation with dozens of satellites, it's sometimes more efficient to attack the ground segment, which is controlling this constellation, and make a conventional attack on the ground site. There's been observed also, for example, in Svalbard for the war in Ukraine a few weeks before the invasion, they switch off for the cut off undersea cables linking ground segments. And then you have nuclear detonation in space, which is the only one which is forbidden by international law, but which has still been used in the 60s by US and Russia at that time. But it's fortunately forbidden by the Outer Space Treaty. And beside that, you still also have other threats like legal warfare, foreign direct investment, and more more logistic or commercial weapons, let's say.
Oh, that's quite a lot of.
That's unfortunately
Tangled was not everyone, I think, not aware of the multitude. It's not like just the attack, the physical attack of the hardware, but also especially the more subtle things about the cyber attacks and targeting critical infrastructures and getting the misinformation. So you could say this is also going more into hybrid warfare, where it's not where also everyone is concerned if the information, identity thefts, and that that kind of thing. So I think
these subtle and attack and that are not attributable are, of course, much more likely to happen than the big missile.
Yeah, and this is really important to keep that in mind, that maybe the missile is just a distraction.
well, it has, of course, permanent effect, and it would
No,
impact
I mean,
all users of space. So,
but yes, yeah. Again, we have talked about, so no European country, I think obviously we have talked about that, can handle all this alone. We talked about cooperation in general. There's Europe, there is NATO, of course. But we're in the Space Café BeNeLux. So there's one question I'd like to ask. Is the BeNeLux, is it just a regional designation for combining those, or is there a living cooperation in space? In place for space?
So BeNeLux is a treaty, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a treaty from the 50s that has been recently renewed in 2008. And that encompasses a lot of different collaboration between these three countries, and security is one of the aspects. So we have a lot of cooperation in the military sector among these three nations, a lot of BeLux cooperation in space, a lot of Belgian-Netherlands cooperation, especially in the Navy aspects. And we are now more and more including the three countries in different projects. Certainly in SATCOM, we have a lot of cooperation between those three countries, and in Earth observation with Belgium and Luxembourg. And for the next generation of Earth observation satellite, there is, let's say, I'm betting on it that there is a high chance to have something Benelux-wise. So yes, there is things happening, and not only for space military and space defense, but also in general for military and for many other aspects, economic, justice, and so on. Benelux is a treaty which is not spoken about a lot, but which is active.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, there's also just that those small countries in that region, but that it's really, it's good to know that. Speaking of corporations, not also for among countries, but to develop things. We sort of talk about commercial. You also mentioned ESA already, the European Space Agency. And recently you took a pretty unique approach. From my understanding, the Belgian MOD and ESA have a special arrangement to work on projects together. Usually it's commercial companies, or there's a special delegation, a national space agency. Why that approach?
Okay, complicated question. This was not the choice of Belgian defense. Let's present it like that. It was a political choice. But there is a lot of opportunity into this framework. So it means that a few years ago, for example, it would have been not envisageable to have a cooperation between the defense or armed forces and ESA because of Article 2 of the ESA Convention and peaceful purpose only. But they also understand that they are under threat, like everyone in space, and they understand that they should encompass this space for defense activities, and especially in REDU, where it's their daily job. So the context of this framework is to finance a part of the Belgian contribution to ESA in optional programs with a Belgian MOD contribution. So it means that Belgian defense will finance ESA optional programs in the next years for a certain amount, which is not negligible compared to the total Belgian contribution to ESA. So it is now we have a strategy to develop this framework and the Belgian MOD contribution, and I think we will have nice success with some flagship program in Earth observation or space-based space situation awareness sensors, for example. But it does not prevent that we should still invest in purely defense technology through other frameworks like EDA, for example, or to at the end complement what's being developed in those frameworks with other programs like European Defence Fund, for example, or national programs.
Yeah, so it's nothing exclusive. It doesn't exclude.
Of course, this money will be spent under ESA conditions, so with Article 2 still in mind. So it will be dual technology, but it does not prevent that we can also invest in EDA framework, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant. Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting approach sometimes in navigating through European waters.
Yeah, sometimes political constraints make that you need to be creative, let's say.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's really we're very interesting. I have a few more questions, but like look at the time, so maybe we take already the questions from the audience now, because I see we have a few. So the first question is, Mark asks, how can we improve the cooperation between EU, NATO and ESA or more national states when it comes to not only peaceful dual use of space?
Well, basically, this was my work for 5 years. And it's a long journey and it's never finished. So it's EU, NATO, ESA are 3 different institutions with different goals, different strategy, different member states, different governance systems. And national states have also their sovereignty and do not want to share everything. And the bigger the nation, the more complicated it means to cooperate. And especially in space, where a lot of stuff are not shared to other nations. So it's really complicated. But in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of improvement. And the most obvious example is the EU space strategy for security and defense, which I think is a major steps towards security and defense in space at a European level. At NATO has, recognized space as an operational domain alongside air, land, sea, and cyber domain, meaning also that any hostile acts on a space asset belonging to a member nation could possibly trigger the Article 5 of collective defense for NATO. So all of this, all these 3 big international organizations have changed their approach towards space security in the last years, because they understand that the strategic paradigm is changing and they need to adapt. And for nation is the same. We have seen the raising of the Space Force in the US, and a lot of different space command and the Air and Space Force in France. So you see that all nations and all organizations are changing their approach, and now all this approach needs to converge, but they do not all have the same objective. So that's where the convergence is complicated. But we still find a lot of synergy and collaboration, at least. But we could write a book on this.
Well, probably. Okay, let's go to the second. I think that answered it very well. It's Christophe. He asks, dear Major Gérôme, first of all, thank you for your service. Our question, how do you evaluate the usage of Galileo versus GPS for EU and NATO defense matters? And what is the sign-up status of potential IRIS² service?
So the first question about Galileo in EU and NATO defense matters, of course, there we speak about the PRS, so the Public Regulated Service, which, as its name states, is a public regulated service. It's not a military, so it's still under civilian governance, but with a potential use by military based on the national decisions to use it. So it's a national responsibility to use the PRS for militaries, and some nations have already done this choice, including Belgium. So it will become an additional navigation and timing sources, positioning, navigation and timing sources for military assets in those nations. But I don't see it becoming, of course, a NATO standard, because not all NATO nations are EU nations, of course, while all NATO nations have an MOU to use the military GPS. So maybe this will be an additional step if we want to distribute the usage of the PRS under NATO, but we are far from reaching that level, of course. Considering second question, the sign-up status of potential RS2 service, this one I will not answer because I do not exactly know what are the status of these nodes. So I'm not able to answer that question.
Okay.
It's more a question for the Commission.
Okay, thank you. Then I go to the next question, also from Christophe. See if you can answer that one. How should we as sovereign and legally responsible states of Europe balance our space cooperation with the US within NATO, and how far do we need to integrate with Indo-Pacific allies such as Japan, South Korea, Australia?
So indeed, the US is a big partner, not only in space for defense, but especially in space. And when we speak about space situation awareness, for example, it's unavoidable that you need to cooperate with the US. But even the US have holes in their Swiss cheese. So they are looking for cooperation, and any contribution to fill up those holes in the Swiss cheese are welcome. And including also Indo-Pacific countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, which is concerned because potentially any incident in space has global consequences. So it means the more global you tackle the problem, the more easy will be, no, not the more easy the solution, but the more efficient will be the solutions. And so first of all, in order to combine forces for space situation awareness and having a complete situation awareness with all these countries together, that's the first step of cooperation. And then you can think about developing common space system and so on. NATO do not own its own space assets, but use data, product, and services from assets from the nations that are operated by the nations. And there we can see a lot of course, integration and compatibility between the capabilities and so on, and develop complementary capabilities among nations. So, but this still requires a lot of sharing of information, and it's a domain where it's complicated. But we see a lot of change. For example, the Allied Persistent Space Surveillance from Space, which is a new program that will start at the NATO level for combining all intelligence assets into like a virtual constellation. It's a very nice project on paper, but there is a lot of work to make it a reality, of course.
Yes, thank you for that overview. Then I have to the next question. It's from Claude. You mentioned in the beginning that it is important to know what's going up in space for detecting eventual threats, who is doing what against whom. Are there already existing solutions for identifying from far distance the origin of the threat?
Well, I don't know what this person speaks when he speaks about, or she speaks about far distance, of course. So there are assets for ground-based assets and space-based assets to observe low Earth orbit or medium Earth orbit or geo belt. And that's why combining all these types of sensors, being optical sensors, laser sensors, radar sensors, RF sensors, that you can build up a complete pictures to see what object is which, and to have a database of all these objects in order to detect an identified object, an registered object, unannounced maneuver, fragmentations, like collisions, and all these kind of events, launch that have not been announced. And while combining all this information from all the different sensors from all the different countries, then you can build up, let's say, your recognized space picture, which should be the most complete possible. And every day there are new technology that are being developed or thought of to improve this detection, but still to have a complete picture remains a challenge. That's sure. And now it's not because you detect something that you know if it's a threat or not, because when we speak about threats, there is a notion of intention. This intention is not detectable by a sensor. This needs intelligence. This needs a lot of more in-depth in-depth analysis, of course, and depends on the geopolitical context also.
Thank you. Then we have one last question. But we've talked about this a lot. Maybe you have something to add to that. So we see in the past that a lot of space-based infrastructure has been outsourced. Keeping in mind that European space-based infrastructure and European interest have steps been taken and or strategies already in place towards EU gaining autonomy in space. So I think we've discussed a bit, but maybe you have something.
So I don't see where the question is. This more a statement.
The question is the strategies or the steps being taken towards.
Yeah, I think the European
EU
space
autonomy
strategy is part of the answer, or at
Yeah.
least it's giving the context for the answer. And there is a big part of this strategy speaking about autonomy in terms of capability, autonomy in terms of space situation awareness, autonomy in terms of industrial capacity, in terms of avoiding foreign direct investments, for example. So autonomy is a very big and large thing to be tackled. So it's not only about the infrastructure themselves, but all from the design to the production to the operation and to the sharing of the products. Let's say.
Yeah, I think there is a lot in place. That's also the EU strategy as such is towards European autonomy, not only in space but also there specifically. And a lot of
in general
are always dedicated to that, where it's emphasized to reduce the dependency from non-European countries or non-partner countries. Yes, so that
we think, for example, to give a bad example of this, is the launcher situation in Europe is catastrophic. And as demonstrated that we do not have this autonomy in the launcher sector, for example, since the last sanction against Russia and some issue on some launchers. Now we see that we basically have no big launchers in Europe, and we're still waiting Ariane 6 with a lot of impatience for many of us. So this proves that we need to do a lot more in terms of autonomy, yes.
Great. So we had all the questions. So also it's time's up almost, already. Let's have a time for wrap up. So coming back to our title question, space for defense or defense for space? I mean, I'd rather from our discussion by say it's space for defense and defense for space, but what's your view?
My view is that both needs both. You need space to have to defend your homeland country, because military needs a lot of space in order to perform their missions, and you need to defend space not only for defense purpose, but just to guarantee the lifestyle that we have now, and to keep space sustainable, which is also the most important, that our grandchildren can also use space, and that it will not be screwed up like many things that human is unfortunately screwing up on this Earth planet. So I think that, for example, if you see the curve of space debris, it's a bit like climate change. Everyone see the big exponential curve coming, but you don't see a lot of behavior change, major behavior change. So everyone is rushing towards this wall, and unfortunately, I will finish with a pessimistic touch here. Is that I think we unfortunately need something big to happen to change the mentality. And I guess that space law will not really involve with binding law if we don't have like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor in space that will force nations to speak together, all of them, and make binding law in order to avoid this Far West that space is becoming now. Sorry
Yes.
to finish with Pacific
No,
Dutch.
I think it's important. This is, if everything was fine, maybe we don't even need to talk about it. So thank you
Yeah, but it's also
for the
in
wake
order
up
to
call.
bring
It's a wake
awareness
up
for
call.
this.
It's
Yeah.
awareness is a wake up call, and I think it's important to talk about it even more. So then, and yes, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for being my guest and this very insightful talk, and including also a reality check of how defense is perceived and especially what needs to be done. So thank you, and back to Torsten.
Thank you, Heike.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicola and Heike. Very, very interesting talk. And I mean, the Pearl Harbor in space, I never heard it before. It doesn't even sound good. So, but I don't want to think that further. However, before we say goodbye, we would like to remind our audience for our next event. So this evening, today at 8 p.m., all times in European summer times, will be the next space bar by Astro Agencies, where we have the great honor to provide the news section to it. Then tomorrow at 4 p.m., we have our next Space Café Scotland by Angela Matisse with Dennis Benusan. He is a space insurer. And coming back to what you just discussed, the topic is enabling and protecting satellite services, the ultimate insurance frontier. Because if stuff is messed up in space, then the insurance companies say very clear, we can't insure you anymore because we can't detect the risk. And that will be interesting to hear their view of the upcoming future on that. Then we are on the road on the 2nd of October. Emma will be in Munich at Aurora Tech's Fire Conference, report from there. I will be on the 4th at the Strategic Framework event in Andoya in North Norway. And then from the 10th to the 12th, we will be in Berlin at the Intergeo and to walk around the floor and report from there. On the 17th, I'm planning for the next Space Café 33 minutes with the Estonian Paul Liers about what's going on in their country. And on the 18th, a day later, there's the German Space Congress here in Berlin, where I will report from. And then 24th, 25th, the Spaceport Norway will open their doors in Oslo, the great event by Ole Docker. And then on the 26th, we just got the confirmation for our next Space Café Israel by the wonderful Major Poignand. So all these events are on or going to be on Eventbrite. And as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and LinkedIn. Let us know who you would like to see on our guests lists. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. And if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a space watcher today. It not just feels good, you also do something good for us to help to maintain our services for events like that. Thank you all for your interest today. And thank you again very much, Nicolas, for this inspiring talk and being our guest, and Heike, as always, wonderful to have you hosting the Space Café BeNeLux series. I would like, I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. And thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow or the next days. Or in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a space watcher. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.